begin by thanking all of you and those who are not here also, who have been here through the semester, for making this a very illuminating course for me also, to a great extent, because it was as I have said before, it's a new new experience for me to teach in this kind of situation, and also to teach this particular series of texts, and I have learnt a lot from it, going through it with all of you, and so thank you once again for that. Today we'll the text we have is mainly the text Gopal Guru, the idea of India, because we started with a book chapters, 2 chapters from a book called The Idea of India, which was written by Sunil Khilnani. That was our first session, and this is an essay which in a way is a response to the whole idea of India sort of discourse, which has been very prominent in our context. But a response from Gopal Guru, a Dalit intellectual, a professor of political science in Jawaharlal Nehru University, who responds to this idea, and from the perspective of the Dalits, but not simply a kind of Dalit perspective, but so much as a plea for universalism. A kind of universalism which he says is absent from both the two other types of idea of India. So he is proposing that there are 3 versions of the idea of India. One is the derivative, which is Partha Chatterjee's idea. So that and one is the Hindutva based Desi identity. Desi means nativist. And the one that he calls the beyond, which is what he will present. So we will go through that. The other text is my own text, which I added simply to sort of give an idea as to how I have been thinking about these issues, independently. So I haven't to give you any notes for that. We'll just talk about it, and hopefully then we'll also try and review the whole course, and I would like to know what all of you think about it, what your comments about this, and overall sort of perspective, what you might have learned, what might be new ways to approach this question, new things to bring to it, comparative. We've had a lot of comparative sort of discussions which compared the Indian material with the Chinese or Japanese or European and other contexts, and that has been one of the most productive things for me, as I can't really say how much that was how useful that was for me. So hopefully we can get to that, to review the course in the latter part of this session today. But in the first session we will begin with Gopal Guru. So this is a derivative idea. What is derivative? The idea of a derivative nationalism is proposed by Partha Chatterjee in a book called Nationalist Thought and the Colonial World, a Derivative Discourse. So what he proposes there is that Indian nationalism is of necessity a kind of based on a adoption of a model of the nation state which is prevalent in the European context, and therefore it has a sort of derivative character to it. So in other words, it has there's a degree of imitation which is involved in it. But he also goes on to say that it is not entirely sort of a replication of the original model, so much as a way in which so much as a kind of adaptation of the idea to the peculiar context of a colonial sort of situation such as India, which is not, which is not sort of already prepared for becoming a nation, as it were, right? So this whole, so what the contrast he develops is between the kind of nationalisms that emerge in Europe in the course of a long centuries of development, industrial capitalism, and ideas of republican democracy, etc. The whole modern experience, right, which is where for instance, the many things that are important to that story, which is one is the way in which the overall suzerainty, if you like, the overall dominance of the church, the Roman Catholic Church, is resisted, and there are national churches which emerge, and so Protestantism, the rise of Protestantism, the Martin Luther is an important element there. And for instance, in England, the Anglican Church, which breaks away from the Roman Catholic, and so on. These are developments, and industrial capitalism, which generates a kind of bourgeois opposition to the aristocratic privileges of the previous feudal sort of social order, and insists on new values such as merit, symbolic equality, right? For instance, in France, the aristocratic monopoly over the entire bureaucracy is broken by insisting upon a choice by blind examination process. So the merit issue comes in, and so on. We know the story. I mean, it's a story that's been told many times, that it's a long process in which different kinds of developments. And of course, the other story, the underside of that, is also the nationalist sort of conflicts in Europe between different nationalities. The internal to Europe, there are conquests, Napoleon's conquest, or English sort of adventurism, or German expansionism, and so on. And finally, what you get is a sort of system of nation states, which becomes in Europe a kind of new way for people to exist. That is, a way that you exist without kings ruling you, right? A king and the monarch and the church as a joint sort of power which rules over human beings. So what happens then is kings, in some places kings are beheaded, as we know in France. The king is dethroned, not only dethroned but decapitated. The seat of power becomes empty, as it were, in the republic. That seat can be occupied by any person in the country, and so on. But in some cases, the king or the queen remains, but in a very symbolic sort of position, right? So this is your story. Now, it is these countries of Europe which are, of course, at the forefront of the Industrial Revolution, and they have immense power. They have navies, powerful navies, which unprecedented naval power. The Dutch, first of all, the Portuguese, the Spanish, the Dutch, the English, and so on. And they are looking, of course, the discovery of the New World, as it were, is also the part of the story. And search for a route to India, the finding of all the various places all over the world. And so they become colonizing powers. They develop, they build empires. French colonies, English colonies, and so on, the Dutch colonies. So this is the history. And so, again, to go back to some of the things we discussed earlier, so all kinds of arbitrary formations come into existence. That is, some piece of land which happens to be under Dutch control, or under English control, or under French control, without necessarily being homogeneous in terms of populations, cultures, ethnic or racial or religious or other characteristics. They are simply units which are defined by which European power had control over them, had power over them. And so in the 20th century, as the struggles for independence begin in different parts of the world and at different stages, you have, it goes on right until the 60s or 70s, this fight for independence, right? And in the process, there are new entities that come into existence, which are obviously, the struggle is based upon, not upon, say in the 19th century there were such struggles also. They were based upon the existing rulers, native rulers, and their desire to get back what they lost. So in India you have 1857, there is some people call it the India's first war of independence, because there was a very massive sort of resistance mounted by traditional powers, that is the kings and queens and other powers which had lost their kingdoms or their empires to the British. That is different. That's one kind of a thing. So there, for instance, the Mughal emperor was a key player in 1857, because the Mughal emperor had become very weak and there is nothing left for the Mughal emperor to rule over. It had become reduced to just little Delhi, one district. So Mughal emperor wants to reclaim it. Some other, so a Nawab somewhere, a Maharani somewhere, a Raja somewhere else, go on. So they get together. That's one kind of fight. But in the 20th century, there are no longer any of these powers. Nobody is powerful enough, no king or emperor is powerful enough to mount a new sort of war. That kind of old war is not possible. The only kind of independence that is possible to think, conceivable in the 20th century, is independence which is based upon the adoption of the model of nation state itself. The idea that a nation, the people of a nation, seek to rule themselves. So in other words, without actually becoming a democratic country or anything like that, the very idea of freedom requires you to adopt the nation state kind of formal principle, right? So it's one of those historical compulsions. It requires a kind of Hegelian sort of imagination to understand how this happens, how in the 20th century it becomes impossible for simply some kingly sort of resistance or something like that. So the nation form is adopted. It's by adopting this nation form that Indians actually then begin to claim for themselves the right to rule themselves, claim freedom, make a demand for freedom. But this nation state form is ready-made. It's not that you have developed it, that the people have gone through all that process which went to where the Europe went through. No, they didn't, because we have colonialism. Colonialism is not democratic. And so this idea then begins to be, pose problems. What is this nation? India. If you look at this map of India at the time of, let's say, the Congress, when the Congress came into existence, it includes Burma, it includes all kinds of places, it's a huge, thing with different nationalities and so on. So, what freedom? Who's claiming the freedom? Are the Hindus claiming, Muslims claiming, the Burmese who are essentially Buddhist? Are they claiming? Is it a religious claim? Is it an ethnic claim? Are the Burmese the same as the Indians? Are the Indians of the south who speak Dravidian languages the same as the people in the north who speak these Indo-European kind of languages? So any number of difficulties with this idea that India is a free, can be free. Who is asking? Who is wanting? No. It seems that there are no people there actually. It seems only some elite people who are educated by the English are basically asking for some relief. They're saying, treat us. So initially, actually, there is no nationalism. All they want is to be treated as equals by the British. saying we study the same law, we pass the same exams, we come and take up a position. Why should we be treated as less than the white people who do the same thing? That kind of a thing. So, in other words, you can't conceive a freedom. You only conceive equality among the British and the natives. Slowly, this begins to emerge as a national movement. 1885 is when the Congress is established, and in fact, Congress is established by an Irishman, a foreigner. There are only a few Indians there, and the main initiative comes from this Allen Octavius Hume. So, for a long time, it remains a dominion status claim. We want dominion status. That is, England will rule, will be in charge of defense and other kinds of foreign relations and military, etc. But internal administration will be completely in the hands of the natives. That is the kind of thing, which is what prevails in Australia, Canada, etc. Slowly, it begins to, in the Swadeshi movement, these people whom we read and whom we talked about, people like Aurobindo Ghosh, Balagangadhar Tilak, the extremists, right? The extremists start to say, no, this is not enough. We don't want that. We want complete freedom, and we have to mount an armed resistance to British rule. But the other aspect of the Swadeshi movement and the terrorism and the extremism in the Congress is that it is very Hindu. Its idea of what the future is that it will become a Hindu nation, right? And so this conflict emerges between the moderates and the extremists, and eventually what you have is Gandhi, who is spectacularly successful, because what he does is he adopts the extremist idea that India must claim absolute independence, but he also adopts the moderate procedures, which is that you must undertake a peaceful struggle. So there is a struggle, and that is the element of the extremist viewpoint, and there is peaceful, that is peaceful and gradual, that is the moderate. So he sort of, if you like, it's a dialectical process in which the Gandhi combines different aspects of the moderate and the extremist sort of programs to come up with this mass movement idea, right? So at that point, another strategic move he makes is he institutes provincial linguistic provinces as the basis of Congress membership. So this is another master stroke by Gandhi, because already the provinces are petitioning the government to give them separate status for administrative purposes, and they are becoming very strong, and the plea is becoming more and more, British are more and more friendly to this demand, because they've already had the bad experience of trying to divide Bengal, which led to opposition from the Bengalis, very fierce opposition, and so they had to reunify Bengal. They had to separate Bihar, they had to separate Orissa. These are the two provinces which were ethnically, linguistically different, and so that becomes an example which other nationalities want to emulate. So they say we also want administrations which are linguistically organized. So Gandhi in a way senses the importance of this to the people of those provinces and adopts it as a Congress demand. This is the one key thing which makes Congress, which was otherwise a very small, very ineffectual application, writing petitions kind of body, to a mass movement, right? Because it sort of absorbs various mass movements that are actually emerging in the provinces, right? It provides an umbrella for all of them, and that is Gandhi's master stroke. And in this way, he builds this India-wide sort of movement, right? And by this time also several things have been resolved. Burma, it is now is a separate thing. So it becomes more or less what is now India and Pakistan, those are the parts which are supposed to be India, and that is the India for which freedom is sought by the freedom movement. So two things are happening here. One is, in terms of future conflicts, it is an area, it's a large area, a subcontinent which includes large areas of Muslim dominance and Hindu dominance in terms of populations. So this is one factor. The other factor is that the national movement is unable to achieve clarity as to what is India and what are these provinces. In terms of political labels, political names, what is the name of this big thing called India? What is, in political terms, what is it? And if it is a nation, as they claim, then what are these? This Bengal, this Maharashtra, this Andhra, this Bihar, these, what are those? There is no answer. Essentially, that is one of the biggest dilemmas of the Indian political existence, is that there is no clear answer. There is a clear answer, you can say, which is that these are the nations, right? These are the nationalities, the Bengal, Bihar, Tamil Nadu, Andhra, Maharashtra, Karnataka, etc., Gujarat. These are the nations, and this India is some kind of a larger federation of these nations which will have a division of powers, right? So there is an answer, but this answer is somehow not acceptable. In the Congress movement, national movement, there is an attempt to suppress this answer, as it were, because they want to claim that India is the nation. So then that means, what are these? These are, they call it regions. These are provinces, administrative. But they are not willing to be called administrative provinces. They don't want to be called by that. They say, we have a long history, our Telugu literature, our Bengali literature is so full of so many great writers and texts. We have had such a long history. Why should we are a nation, we are and so on. There is this conflict. But this conflict is not a very sharp conflict, because Hinduism unifies them. So because there are two conflicts, one is Hindu-Muslim conflict and one is the conflict of different nationalities. But when it comes to the Hindu-Muslim conflict, all these nationalities will quietly fall behind each of their religious affiliations, right? So it is because of the religious affiliation that the provincial affiliation is subdued, kept in check. But it is not something which will go away. It will keep haunting the Indian nation for as long as it exists, because even today that is one sore point. Constantly these nationalities keep making all kinds of demands, unreasonable claims. They refuse to follow centre's orders and so on. It's a constant kind of rift. But at the same time, India is economically fully integrated. Each part is dependent on every other part. Every part produces and manufactures and circulates its goods in other parts. Every people from every region go to every other possible region for work, and so on. Economically integrated, but economic integration has not meant national, that kind of Indian level integration in terms of subjectivities, culture, etc. It remains, it continues to have serious differences, which can be managed easily, by acknowledging the nature of the situation, the unique situation that you have. But instead of that, the nation form is somewhat forcibly imposed at the all India level, creating tensions, unnecessary tensions within the political domain. This has been the story of this kind of derivative. To the extent that it is derivative, this derivative nation form has these kinds of consequences, because it is simply slapped on to a space without consideration of its internal components, divisions, natural fault lines, and so on. The Desi, which what Gopal Guru calls the Desi, is in a way an answer, a kind of, if you know, in Freudian terms, the return of the repressed. That's what you see, because at the time of independence under Nehru, India claimed to be a secular democratic republic, and it said Hindus, Muslims, Christians, all are sarva dharma samabhava. This idea that is sarva dharma samabhava, is all religions are treated with equal respect. That is Indian secularism, right? So this idea was in some ways, because India began with a partition, violent, millions of people killed or displaced or maimed and so on, an absurd exercise. Imagine entire populations moving into one place and moving into another place. Obviously they meet each other, they clash, they die, they have swords and guns and kill each other. It was the bloodiest kind of freedom. This Indian freedom came in the most bloody fashion possible for both sides, Pakistan and for India. Now, but the Indian government tried to suppress this, nationalities on the one hand, but also did not want to acknowledge Hinduism as its, because if Pakistan is Muslim, what is India? This is the question. And to be able to answer that in a secular way, you have to have the proper understanding of the nature of the given sort of communities, that is non-religious communities. There are non-religious communities in India, that is linguistic communities, and if you had worked with them, this is my, now I am sort of giving you something that it comes from my understanding of the situation. If you had worked with those, there was no need for Hindutva, there would have been no scope for Hindu nationalism to return as it has done in today's India. The return of that is because it was repressed rather than handled, attacked direct, frontally. You did not face up to the problem at the time of independence. So this Desi, what it does is, this Hindutva, nationality, it wants to swallow everything. So for instance, Gopal Guru gives a very interesting idea. Buddha, right? Buddha was the propagator of a new moral sort of discourse, religious discourse. It's not a religion in the strict sense, but it was a kind of revolutionary sort of breakaway from Hinduism. Buddha broke away from book, but the Hinduism will try to say that, in India you have this idea that God takes incarnation, avatar, right? This avatar principle. They say Buddha is an avatar of the same Hindu God. So this is a way of assimilating all, heterodox, dissenting sort of sects or revolutionary movements back into Hinduism, and trying to define the entire subcontinent as a Hindu land, and to then develop these kinds of antagonistic, violent movements against Muslims or against minorities and so on, and to forcibly convert people, tribals, go to tribal areas and compete with the Christians, because the Christians have been going there and doing some social work there. They are actually giving the tribals or the lower caste people a certain dignity. They're helping them actually. I mean, of course, they convert, and then there's also a Christian racket, conversion racket. But that's in addition to the fact that they genuinely did do some good work among these poor people. So the Hindus will go and try to interfere there. They'll burn churches. They'll kill these missionaries and these kinds of things, and so on. So it's now reached that stage where both the derivative and the Desi are actually a combination, a virulent kind of combination, which is a constant source of violence and instability for India. So Gopal Guru is suggesting basically that this beyond which he talks about is something that is an idea of India which comes from the people who are not in the national movement or in the Hindutva movement, but those who had to struggle to have their voices heard by these movements, because they are the lowest of the low, the wretched of the earth, the ones who had no access to education until the British came, the ones who lived in the utmost wretched, miserable conditions in slums, and who were always exploited but never considered to be part of the community, etc. Right? Outcasts, lower castes and outcasts. So he says, he gives two examples. One is Jyotirao Phule. This was a 19th century figure, from a lower caste, a flower selling caste. And he was a remarkable man. He and his wife, in the 19th century, undertake in Maharashtra an amazingly, enlightened kind of reform movement, which they start schools where, first of all, they are among the first to start schools for women, for children, girl children, and they start schools where they try to provide education without caste considerations. This is also a first, and so on. So Jyotirao Phule, who undertakes a critique of Hinduism from a perspective of somebody who wants to transform it, to make it a better sort of society. And in the 20th century, B.R. Ambedkar, these are the two figures, and we know, we have studied B.R. Ambedkar in this session, in these classes. And what Gopal Guru is saying is they provide a different idea of India, which cannot be achieved except by critically engaging with what exists. So, by contrast, it turns out that the derivative nationalism, that is mainstream nationalism of the Nehru-Gandhi kind, is always trying to promote the past as somehow good. Everything in the past is good, and what we need is, we want it back. So British have to go, but we want our, the caste system is good, and everything in the past is good. So everything is affirmative, right? Only negation is British rule. Whereas these people, their critique is addressed to the social context itself. The negative critical focus on your own existing social life. Right? What is wrong with it? What has it done? What harm it has done? What we can do to improve it? Right? This is the approach. Whereas, so you have this divide, which we again spoke about earlier, which is those who look at the idea that to be free, you need social freedom first. And those who say that is not important, we only need political freedom. They define political freedom without social freedom. That is the mainstream nationalities. So this is the contrast that Gopal Guru is claiming, that it's that there is a third idea of India, which is a far more powerful one if only it would have more adherents, if more people were to adopt it, and if more people were to take a critical look at the Indian realities, as well as these mainstream national movements and their discourses. So his plea, Gopal Guru's plea, is actually for a critical look at the discourses of nationalism, and saying, no, today's intellectual Indian intelligentsia, the dominant intelligentsia, he is always celebrating these national movement and saying everything, somehow glorious thing. He is saying you must take a critical look at it, to examine it carefully, to see its faults, its misrepresentations, and to go back to the social question, and start from there. So he also says why, while the mainstream is always trying to be positive about the past and everything that is Hindu, the wretched of the earth, the lowest of the low, for them, they have to even move out of their political, their stagnation, they have to do something, which is they have to posit a new ideal which is the complete opposite of their current existence. Right? That is, today you are living in filth, you are being oppressed, you have no dignity, you have no self-respect. So tomorrow the ideal says you will become a person with self-respect, dignity and honor and equality. So in other words, for these people, the ideal that they set up towards which they have to work is the ideal of destroying what exists in order to create what will be tomorrow's idea. For the mainstream national movement, everything in the given situation is good. So they are not, they have there is no negative dimension to their critics, to their discourse at all. Their discourse is entirely affirmative. The only negative element is the opposition to British rule, because they saying they want to rule. So in that sort of in a very sharp sort of contrast that he develops between these two experiences, and he says this, these thinkers, he says Guru, fail to fit into the definitional framework of political thought that is hegemonic in India, and which is celebrated in the idea of the argumentative Indian. This phrase, the argumentative Indian, is the title of Amartya Sen's book. Amartya Sen wrote a book on, he writes on, he's an economist, and he won the Nobel Prize for economics, but he also writes on cultural issues a lot. And this is one of his cultural books called The Argumentative Indian. It's a celebration of ancient India and Indian thought, where he goes and says how it's the Indian tradition to sit down and discuss and argue with each other, and argument is somehow very inherent to the Indian character and so on, which is it's a kind of ideological construction of this happy Indian situation where everybody is arguing with each other. But Gopal Guru is questioning this so-called argumentative Indian, which which is restricted to a tiny minority of population. The only people who argue with each other are about 2% of the Indian population. So this is no big argumentative Indian. The thesis collapses when you start considering who is actually doing this argumentation, who is allowed to do it, who is excluded from it, who cannot even listen to it, right? There are some people who can't even listen, sit outside and listen, because if they listen, the holy words that you come out of your mouth become polluted, and so on. So this kind of illusory sort of ideal of the argumentative Indian is questioned here, right? And he says it's a thought process that is the new, the beyond, what he calls the beyond, the thought of Pule and Ambedkar, is a thought that expresses dissonance, difference and defiance. It is a negative thinking, a critical thinking, which seeks to critically destroy what exists before an affirmative project can be instituted. It challenges the mechanical language of unity as proposed by the national thinkers, and it proves to be an embarrassment to nationalist thought. And in so doing, he claims, it performs an ethical function, because the ethical function is to speak the truth to the lies that the national movement has been propagating about India. So it's a way, in a way, it's an attempt to claim India, for the masses, for the people, once again, because somehow India has been claimed on behalf of a minority. Now it's time again to claim it for the people who are actually the residents of this and so on. So the ethical function is to speak the truth as far as the given situation is concerned, and that truth somehow does not come through in the writings of Amartya Sen or the national movement to the same degree. They try to, it's not that there is no criticism, but they try to somehow quickly pass over the critical points to come to the affirmative points. And that is what these thinkers oppose with their negative program of criticism. The invocation of an affirmative language in the subaltern thought leads to the reconstruction of consciousness whereby every being existing at the margins becomes his or her own opposite. That is, the wretched of the present posit for themselves a positive figure for the future. In other words, Guru is arguing that unlike the nationalists who clung to existing identities and sought to protect them, the Dalits and the Shudras, in a nearly superhuman effort to raise themselves out of their wretched condition, posit as a goal, an ideal, a figure endowed with dignity and self-respect. In this task, they take the aid of whatever resources are available. Here, Gopal Guru brings another point, which is the national movement people are always saying, you must fight the British with Indian weapons, not with their own weapons. But these people say, our aim is freedom, our aim is self-respect, our aim is dignity. And in achieving this dignity, if I want to, we cannot simply say we want to use only Indian weapons, because the Indian intellectual weapons are deprived. We are not given to us. The intellectual wealth of India, whatever it is exclusively the monopoly of a few people. So we don't have any wealth, we don't have any intellectual tradition. We have been deprived of education all for thousands of years. So we have no resources, and we don't care whether our resources for fighting our battles to win some freedom and respect and dignity comes from the foreigner or the native. And the native won't give it to us. Therefore, the foreigner has no problem with our taking his ideas and using them for our benefit. So what's the problem? So he questions the nativism that is inherent in the nationalist thought. They do not respect the protocols that the mainstream nationalists feel bound to, which is that only native thinking is to be employed, that borrowing from the West is somehow problematic. The nationalist problematic suppresses questions of justice, equality, dignity, etc., and emphasizes only self-rule, elite democracy, political freedom, etc. In the nationalist concept, political freedom overshadows social freedom. And also, self-rule subsumes self-respect. That is, self-rule first, self-respect later, or maybe not, right? And political freedom, not social freedom. So, Gandhi, turning to Gandhi, he says, Gandhi's freedom of movement. This is a point about how Gandhi, Gandhi can say, I represent the Vaishyas and the Dalits and the Shudras and the Brahmins, everybody. So, but the Ambedkar cannot do that. You see, Ambedkar has no, he can only represent his own people. There's some that freedom is basically social power, right? And that means that in this context, you are not developing a new polity, a new political subject, where it doesn't matter who, whether it is Gandhi or Ambedkar, it should not matter. But somehow it becomes that Gandhi's freedom of movement, he can go and live in a Harijan, he can give them a name. He's saying, I will call you Harijans. This naming is a power, right? And they say, who are you to give us a name? We have a name already, right? And so on. This kind of conflict, right? So the failure to universalize, to occupy a space which is free for all, as it were, where Gandhi and Ambedkar and Nehru can be equal, that kind of a thing. That is only possible through this negative critique of existing conditions and movement towards something new. It is not possible on the basis of existing reality, right? That's the thing. The language of right is constitutive of assertion, while the language of duty favored by the nationalist leadership places emphasis on the humble side of human nature. So nationalist leaders, that's another thing, they always say our duties towards the nation, not rights but duties. So you are appealing to the person, the human subject, to be humble, to do their duty, not to question, not to say anything, not to claim a right, not to assert themselves. So this is again a way of an ideology that promotes humility, and sort of obedience, and quiet, sort of participation in the program. Now, concept of freedom in the national movement is adequate only in the absence of social freedom. But for Guru, the concept of freedom is incomplete unless it can acknowledge and accommodate caste questions as social reality. And that, in his view, is the discourse of the beyond, the one that goes beyond the existing mainstream national movement and the Hindutva, and the challenge posed by Hindutva, right? So in a way, see, you have a triangle here, right? You have the national movement with its combination of Nehruvian and Gandhian elements, right? Which is secular, right? They have some idea of equality, but they always fall back upon some kind of affirmative view of India. But it's still secular, progressive. Many of its aspects are progressive. Then you have the threat posed, the danger posed by Hindutva, Hindu nationalism. Now, this Congress nationalism, the secular progressive nationalism, is worried about this threat, but it is not able to see in what way its own history is the source of the rise of this threat, right? That's the thing. So in a way, the discourse of the beyond that Gopal Guru is presenting is presented to this sector to understand, how it has it has itself created this monster which now is haunting India, which is now destroying India. That how it has suppressed problems, how it has failed in the task of critique, and thereby, allowed for Hindutva to grow into the menace that it is now in contemporary India, right? So in a way, it's a critique, but it's also addressed in a sort of alliance, in the way of an alliance, right, to this section, to this sector. And that's why the people who represent the derivative discourse model, which is related to the Congress model, are Partha Chatterjee and Sudipta Kaviraj, whom we have read, right? He cites those two, and he is engaging in a kind of appreciative, friendly, but critical sort of commentary on them, saying that you have to go beyond the mixed, this affirmative sort of narrative, and you have to really take seriously now the question of the social realities and what has caused this kind of present state of affairs, right? So in that way, it is on this side, but it is trying to bring the mainstream secular democratic sort of discourse to its senses, to see, to see, to understand the situation properly. It's a very powerful kind of critique, and it's a slightly obscure because he speaks, he writes in a certain philosophical terminology, which is not, I know, always easily understandable, but I think it offers a very astute sort of analysis of the problems and a set of solutions which are based in the task of criticism. My own essay is an attempt. It's an essay on language, Republic of Babel, It's my attempt to sort of reintroduce the language question into Indian intellectual discourse. Because what has happened is that somehow, the language issue was very, very, very important in the before independence. In the Congress, it was a very important issue. But after independence, Nehruvian, they tried to suppress the language question. First of all, they said, we are a new country, we are unstable, we have not yet found our feet, and so many enemies are there around us. Pakistan is the new enemy, and imperial conquest is still a possibility. They may come and take over again. And so a fear of what happens in the future. So they said that is why these claims for internal division into linguistic provinces, they thought was somehow divisive. They divide the people. But actually there is nothing dividing. They were saying, do this for the better, functioning of this unit, of this independence that we have just achieved. But they said that. And the other reason that was given was that they wanted to choose Hindi as the national language. And in the South, they objected because it's a very simple thing. You see, administratively, bureaucracy is the biggest employer in India. Now, about 35 to 40% of the Indians speak Hindi, right? They are native speakers of Hindi. Now, supposing you introduce Hindi as the national language and all administration is conducted in the national language, and the recruitment to the bureaucracy is through Hindi language examinations, 60% of the population will be unable to write those exams as well as the Hindi speakers. And the farther away you go from the Hindi belt, the more difficult it is for people to learn this language. And education in everything, in all kinds of spheres of life. So they said, no, we can't do that. And they said, at least English, we already have been learning English. So we can write, so we will be equally disadvantaged. Everybody knows English to the same extent all over India. Whereas Hindi gives an unusual advantage. That's where the Indonesian example is so interesting, because they chose a language which is not a language of some local majority, ethnic majority, but a language of something which was removed socially from all of them. That in some ways was, and in a way you could say that English is precisely that kind of a language. Nobody's language, everybody's language kind of thing. But this is where this whole nation business, the confusion about what is the nation comes into the picture, right? Is India the nation, or is the India a federation? Because if it's a federation, there are no emotional issues involved about language, right? The nations have a certain emotional attachment to all kinds of ethnic attributes, like your culture, the food you eat, the clothes you wear, the language you speak. These are all national sort of things you treasure and so on. But there is no such language for India, right? India doesn't have that kind of emotional, all of India, it's not possible. So there was no need to get particularly worried about what language will people use to communicate between one state and another, one province and another, or from a province to the center. You can just do it with English or with Hindi, no problem, whichever language suits you. If the Tamil state wants to communicate with the neighboring Telugu state, they can use their own languages. And when they want to communicate with the center, they can use English. Or if they are somebody like Gujarat or Bengal who are much closer to Hindi, they can use Hindi. It doesn't matter. So you can have two or three languages, and you eliminate that question. But the national movement was not able to think about like this, because they put an affective burden on the federal language. Right? This is a completely unnecessary thing. But it's because for them that is the nation, and these are not nations. They wanted to somehow build an India in which slowly these national differences will be eliminated. It was a wild dream. I mean, you can't do that. You can't do it when each of these nationalities has 70 million, 100 million, 80 million, 40 million people speaking that language and knowing no other language. You can't eliminate it like that. But they obviously had that kind of a egomaniacal kind of ability to imagine that they can actually do this. And so the nation, this confusion, you actually have a confusion, and a confusion which is linguistic in nature, because failure to understand the English language and the history of nationalism, to not understand the difference between this unity and this and its component parts, and trying somehow to take away the word nation from there and put it there on top and call India a nation. It was really an exercise in misnaming and the consequences thereof. Right? So the federal language is a language of global communication, basically, purely communicative. It need not have any emotional element to it, to that choice, what choice you make, right? As long as you understood that its function is federal communications. But there you go, that's precisely what they were not able. So in effect, what has happened as a result is, in India, serious class interests have developed for between center and states. There is a class interest in the center. So the national parties are actually all the time somehow trying to stealthily, not even formally, but stealthily take more and more powers away from the states, and the states keep resisting, and so on. This is how, because it becomes somebody's class interest. Those who are occupying the national mainstream, their class interests have become completely removed from the class interests of the regions, of the provinces, and so on. So it's become a highly complicated social situation where the class, it's not an India where there is a class system, class inequalities across the board. There are class inequalities between center and states, and then there are class inequalities within each province, right? This kind of complicated thing has developed, and vested interests have developed in all of these things, and there are those who want at any rate to promote the national versus the region. They want to somehow suppress, and so on, and it keeps coming up because it cannot go away, because even today, with all of this Hindi learning, etc., the majority of people cannot function effectively in that language. It is not, they just can't get their tongues to move in the, they can, at the most they can say a few words to, get by in a new environment, if they travel to the north or something. But this is not enough for life, right? To lead a full political, social life. This is not. You have to be. So my argument in my paper is to say that it is actually the duty of the Indian state to encourage these languages, so that in the service of greater freedom for the people, right? How do you empower your people? Allow them to have a political life in the, without having to learn a new language for it, right? Because you are not even able to tackle the illiteracy problem. Even today, 40% are illiterate. How are you going to, conduct a full-fledged, political life, which includes everybody? If you can't even do that, they at least know their own language without going to school. And if you cannot converse about political matters, if you cannot, receive political messages from the state in your own language, what is the democracy that you have achieved, right? That kind of a thing. It is simply an idea that you let the provinces have their share autonomy, the autonomy that has conceived. It's not a new idea. This autonomy was conceived even at that time, right? It was suppressed. To give them the full autonomy, to remove all emotional attachments to this Indian federal language, make it a purely functional thing, which means you can say English or Hindi, right? Like Badiou says about Christianity, that when Saint Paul started the Christian, said he was a new sect. So the Jewish sects, Jesus sect was also a Jewish sect for a long time, until Saint Paul came and changed it, right? So he says that all these Jewish sects said, in those days they all used to have bodily marks to distinguish them. Like in India, people have, you put a nama or you put something here, and so on. They had all kinds of marks. Circumcision, for instance, was one such. So the Jewish sects asked Saint Paul, so are they going to be circumcised or not? So he said, it doesn't matter. That was the master stroke, right? So the compulsion to choose, circumcised or not, he refused to choose. It's of no consequence to the particular religious order that I want to build. It makes no. So Hindi or English, it's of no consequence, right? Because its function is it's a functional requirement. It's not it has no emotional charge to it. So you could have, so that was basically where I am coming from, in order to say that there are increasingly, as globalization, as capitalism develops, what's happening is in different national these provinces, you see the rise of all kinds of this kind of ethnic fundamentalisms. People who indulge in violence on the basis of language or something, and so on. And that is also a product of this kind of situation, where you try to suppress it, but it will never go away, and it will come back in a pathological sort of form to disrupt and so on. So political life never gets sort of regrounded properly in a new way. So that the modern question is resolved. So resolving the modern question doesn't mean life's problems are resolved, but something is resolved in order to move on, with other to look at other things. But what's happening in India is you're constantly always talking about these formal problems. You are never able to get away from the formal questions that continue to haunt us: nation or not nation, federation or province, and so on and so forth. This is one of the most sort of distracting of distraction, but also it keeps you preoccupied with these kinds of questions, which ought to have been resolved at the time of independence, right, and so on. So it's that's my way, and I'm also trying to suggest that the religious nationalism that has again become so dominant in India is also something which can only be opposed and challenged effectively by greater provincial autonomy. Because within the province, it will be a Hindu, but see, where everybody is Hindu, the language identity overcomes the religious identity. So Hindu will remain, but it will have its presence will have less effectivity. Whereas in this all India level, because the British defined India as Hindu and Muslim populations, this is a constant source of tension. So it's only when you have to find identification at that level, and it's not surprising that this whole problem is entirely a problem of the North, more or less. In the South, there is now an influence, but it's not so strong, because that's where this definition of Hindu and Muslim as the two sociological units in India is become so strongly identified with. And the Hindu nationalism does not want provincial autonomy. They want to get more and more integration on the basis of religion. They want integration, which means that exclusion of the Muslims, minoritization of the Muslims, putting them in giving them secondary status, or forcing them to adopt all kinds of Hindu cultural symbols and so on, or or hostile sort of attacks on them. This kind of a thing. So a number of my understanding is that a lot of our political problems are formal problems. The inability to sort out formal questions, which actually have a real sort of consequences in terms of our of the energy that we are forced to spend on these issues of this kind of so yeah, that is briefly about my language related arguments.
Is it possible that all nations can be conducted as a federal system?
All nation?
Yeah, all different states.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, conduct, because we are really provinces.
Uh-huh.
I mean, like China could also be.
Okay.
Is it possible
Right.
to
Yeah.
view China as a federal system with different provinces?
Yeah.
As their own autonomous government or states, nation.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, the problem would be how to divide the province, because it's not pure linguistic.
Right. Yeah.
The division of the provinces is again bureaucratic decision.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
No, my understanding of this is to say that history has produced a norm, right? The nation state form as a norm, and it has become a historical compulsion that all the entire globe is divided into according to this by using this normal this kind of morphology has become a historical compulsion, right? Everywhere the United Nations is indicates that now everybody is a nation, right? Now what I'm saying is that the nation form in some ways is like, in some cases the form disappears when the actual into the content, if you like, right? It's like like in a marriage, sometimes when the marriage is going well, you're not conscious of the marriage. There's just two people who seem happy, but when the marriage is not going well, you see three entities, the husband, the wife, and the marriage, right? The marriage seems to be the it's like that. The form in these new nation states, the form is always somehow there's a gap. There's always this.
But that's a problem because power resides in forms.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So it's difficult to get away with.
Get away with the
form and power structure.
And
social relations build upon these power structures.
Right.
And capitals they go to the center of the power.
Yeah. No, true. The nation form is such a form that what you said, like it's an instrument for and so.
You see, no, I was also thinking of this whether we could reconfigure or reconceptualize either nation or state, and to rethink community as autonomous, and they have each unit, social unit, it has its own government or state, depending on not depending on their origin, their religion, or their blood and colors, but this whoever come to to live together, they have to form their own government, and so we don't need to really say it is a nation or it is a nation state. It's not. It's just a government, a social government.
Right.
Yeah. So then each government and the neighboring government, like Taiwan and Hong Kong, or Hong Kong and China, or Hong Kong and Fukien, and the other provinces, they can form their autonomous government, and then everything could be collaborated or in the federal system. And then in that case, Europe and India could also be that way. So, but even that is the case, still there would be a class conflict and inequality within the community. Yeah, so what you said, the Guru's concept of negative criticism, or always engaging with the debate or critique with a given system, it's necessary. Yeah. Nothing can avoid this drawbacks of.
Yeah, I mean, that is a glaring absence in the national movement, and that's why I think it's important to remind ourselves of that, because the need to affirm your pre-existing the past was very strong, and it may be that the reasons were very defensive reasons, that the British were all the time laughing at you, denigrating everything that you know. So in a defensive reaction, people also adopt this, you say, no, everything about us is good. You turn it around, that kind of thing. But eventually it proves counterproductive, because you are not attending to, so you can't always only be reacting to somebody else's sort of, statements. You have to be able to turn around, autonomy, freedom and autonomy actually means that you turn, your ability to look at your own, sort of situation without, without minimizing the problems, and critically try to go beyond them, right? That itself is a sign of autonomy, a sign of freedom, and so that's the point I think Gopal Guru is emphasizing.
That is, even people are allowed to use their local language linguistically. I mean, they don't need to be bound to use federal language, national language.
Yeah.
Still, within that community, there are class struggles.
They will be. Yes, that's the point. Right? But the class struggle must itself have a medium in which the struggle can take place. Right? There is no medium in which the struggle, if there is no medium. And that's why I, in a more recent essay, which I was writing while I was here actually for a conference that I am attending, I am trying to use the idea of commons, the commons, to understand language itself in capitalist societies. That it is the commons, because it is in the medium of language that the class inequalities that can be somehow overcome in order to constitute a social whole, right? You can't have a social whole in an unequal situation without the, early in the, you could have, in the old days you could have it through religious, symbols, totems or whatever, or you can have it through who is ruling you, which king is your king. But in modern popular sovereignty, language is the commons which enables you to live the unequal societies to retain a wholeness, a integrity, right? So that within that, so what is modern democracy if not a way to conduct class struggles in some organized fashion, right? Parliamentary democracy and all these democratic procedures are basically saying, yes, there are inequalities, struggles, class interests in conflict with each other, but they must be fought through these mechanisms, the vote, the parliamentary debate, and so on, right? So this is your way of organizing, and that process, right, in which all class interests can then come into conflict, come into engagement with each other, compete for popular vote and so on, can only happen if the process is conducted in the commons, right? It cannot be if you conduct the
evils within the common.
yeah,
Sure.
huh?
I mean, yeah.
You can't take the battle into the living room of say a powerful person, because there the people cannot enter in order to put their case there, right? The parliament is like the commons, like like a village. In a village, people sit under a tree, and there are some elders who sit in judgment over a case, right? Supposing you say this case will be heard in the zamindar's, in the landlord's house, and says landlord's house, all people who are not wearing pants cannot enter, or dirty feet, okay, labor. Then where is your justice? Where is the common, sort of commonness of that? So it's like that. If you adopt English as the language of state, you are doing the same thing.
It's
right?
not just a language issue. I mean, everywhere you turn, every corner you turn, it's about this mechanism, this modern mechanism.
Right.
For instance, the courthouses.
Yeah.
If you don't learn the language, you don't have, practice the
Right. Yeah.
then you have no way to.
No, but that is in some ways, see, the language is also, I think what you are suggesting is, even if it is one language, within that language there are many different registers, right, technical, which are not available.
Just one of these different mechanisms.
Yeah, these technical registers. So ordinary people cannot walk into a court of law and speak and be heard properly, right? They don't know the language of the court, so they have to go through the lawyer and so on, right? Similar.
Politics too.
Sorry.
Politics.
Ah.
If you want to practice.
Right.
Anyone wants to practice politics. You want to go into the political arena. You
Uh-huh.
have to learn their language.
Yeah, so that's true, but that's not, see, that is saying, okay, you want to be in a particular field, you need to speak a particular register of the same language. That is, you have to now start talking in terms of stakeholders or something like that, right? Which is new words. You have to learn these new words and new parliamentary decorum and so on, right? But the idea is that in the modern nation state, these are all different registers of the same language, isn't it? Compared to the previous time when the language of rule and the language of mass, everyday, the popular language were completely different. There was no relation between them.
So what you're suggesting is that there's actually no absolute necessity to have a unified language for a region or an area to.
No, the unified language is an historical necessity, in the sense that you do away with the duality of language, which is a characteristic of feudal regimes, monarchic regimes. And in monarchic regimes necessarily separate the language of the elite, the administration, from the language of the people. It's different, right? It's a refined version or whatever it is, completely separate, mutually unintelligible. But in the popular sovereignty model of the nation state, you do away with the duality. You say that it's one, the same language. But in practice, even here, you develop these specialist registers which create experts, and so experts monopolize various functions, right? We know that. In modern, you can't, there are so many things that one can, sometimes ordinary people can't fill a form, even if it's in their own language, because the technicalities are there. But it's a difficulty of a register rather than the difficulty of a new language. So in that sense, even if it is substantially illusory, the idea that it's one language is important for modern democratic nation, that form, that political form which we now have in the world. That it somehow requires this illusion, even if it's an illusion, that it is the same language.
Can I take the opposite of the stand to argue?
Yeah.
Yeah, because the assumption is hinges on this claim of the nation form.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But it's also, so I think the point of departure is precisely on this issue, where you stand.
Where, yeah.
In the sense that precisely because the form, nation form creates all the problems. Right? So there are two ways to deal with it. One is you're trying to make everything work according to the nation form. Right? The other is to break away from it because it doesn't resolve the problem. And you now imagine what would be the way to resolve, and you come up with another universal form, trying to replace this nation form.
Yeah. So, but what is the concrete way to do that?
No, the problem is precisely, I think, the conclusion you draw in your own essay. I think the problem is you said to answer such questions a long way off, since we have hardly begun the task of analyzing present linguistic order.
Yeah.
Right?
No, that's true. I mean, this
is exactly what I mean. So, in other words, what are the forms and the problems, there?
Yeah,
What are the possibilities already emerging rather than imagining? Right? I think that the sort of taking, how do you say, taking stock and to analyze it on the table.
Yeah.
Rather than assuming this is the only way to go.
No, but I'm not assuming it's the only way to go. But there is already in motion a policy which assumes it is the only way to go, even though it is violative of its own assumptions. That is the problem. You see, the norm is not just out there for you to say, okay, let's not use the norm, let's look at the reality. But the norm is in the reality, right?
I know.
So that is the complication which makes it very difficult to get this grip on this thing. So first of all, the critique is aimed at a particular kind of way of understanding the norm itself and its implementation and the failures and so on. So in that sense, it doesn't matter that you deviate, that you are not falling into the nation state form in some happy way, right? That doesn't matter. What matters is to be able to know exactly where you fall, in what is the form of your existence, right? To derive the form of your existence from the actual existence, right, is the challenge. Yeah. But that form which you derive will include the norm that you adopt, as the gap between yourself and the norm is part of your reality.
In a way, I think the issue is, how should I say, either you say we separate out all these problems, right? Or you see this one of the part of the integrated, how should I say, integral whole of the problem that is between your essay and the other one. How do you interlink these two? They are in reality cannot be separated.
No, they cannot be separated. Right? Yeah.
But how these two issues? Because boiling down, if you get to the language issue, how do you deal with the Dali issue?
Right.
Sort of.
No, I have a way of understanding that also, in the sense that, see, this is a question of form again. I'm trying to say that political morphology should be the focus. What is the nation state form historically? So I don't think with alternatives. I don't say there is an alternative. There is a history. The norm is historical. So I think I have a strict Hegelian sort of approach to this. There is no alternative. There is only what is, and what are the futures possible. What future is built into this present, right? So the nation is there in that way, what Catherine Malibu calls the plasticity of, So in that sense, nation state form retains that plasticity in today's present. It is still has a future. In a sense, it still has that, that give, which attracts people to it, right? So you have that situation. So essentially the thing is, when nationalities enter the world stage, history, right? What is happening is, it is a kind of community form which subsumes and overcomes those smaller forms which were in that space. That is, your caste community and your linguistic and national community have a dialectical relation with each other. And it's because the language is the common element that dialectic actually is mobilized. Whereas the empire, right? If you take the contrast example, there is a, Michael Walzer, this American political philosopher, he talks about empire. He talks about how, which political form is more tolerant, in terms of religious differences, cultural differences. And he says actually empires are more tolerant. Now, but he says, of course, that doesn't make, that doesn't mean we want to go back to empire, because we know that empires are, what empires can do. But the thing is that empire is a fence. The linguistic community's relation to the caste community is not the relation of a fence to something that is inside the fence. You just put a ring around it. The empire is just a fence. The empire's boundaries do not have a dialectical tension with the community within the empire. Whereas the linguistic community has a direct dialectical tension, imposes a tension on each community, smaller community, caste, religion, whatever, which is in that linguistic field. So in that sense, the fact that caste persists in India can also be attributed to this lack of clarity about what is the nation. Because to take India as the nation and to disown these other things is to create conditions for the perpetuation of all the internal small communal entities. And that's what exactly is happening.
Yes and no, but if you look at from the point of view of the caste, it obviously exceeds the boundary of India.
No. But the castes have their own distinctive linguistic character.
Yes, but you bound it within the notion of India. But actually, as you said in the beginning, right, even Burma and so on, all these neighboring territory has this caste issue.
No, Burma, I don't know what they have, but
or even like by now, Pakistan is not part of India, but whether there is, or Bangladesh, right? So you're trying to contain everything within the national form, whereas itself still operates beyond these. So in other words, in a way, we're talking about pre-nation state historical forces still exist in the contemporary, which cannot be bound by the nation state, right?
Yeah.
In that sense, so even
which are bound by each nation state. See, what is there in Pakistan is bound by Pakistan borders, right? What is there in India is now within this border. So there is complete separation of these things.
No, but
so
if you resolve the caste issue within the Indian order, the caste issue still exists in Bangladesh order.
But that's Bangladesh has to take care of that, right? It's different. In the sense, how do you, so you are, found yourself in this political unit. In this political unit, what are the, ways in which to overcome what you recognize to be problematic social conditions?
No, I don't know. Let's argue about this. I mean, for you, if that's the case, then, for instance, class struggle is a global struggle. which can only be contained within the nation-state form, if the argument stands. Right? Or the struggle in Bangladesh had nothing to do with India. I mean, that argument would have to be dealt there. Right?
No,
and so on.
no. See, there are two things. Class is that new thing which is part of the same story as the rise of nation states and the rise of classes as opposed to other estates, etc. Right? It's part of a new reality. So the bourgeoisie is necessarily international in its maybe in its scope, its perspective, in its ideology, etc. But caste vis-a-vis the nation is a prior and subsumable entity. Right? It is one of those things which historically is containable within the new, because these are larger identities. The national identity, linguistic national identity, is necessarily a larger one than the caste identity. Right? And it's the more recent one, and it's the more powerful one. And it has traditionally been able to subsume, dissolve under the best circumstances, those identities. Not by eliminating them, not by attacking them and trying to annihilate them, but simply by producing this stronger identity attraction called the national identity. It is happening even in India. The linguistic provinces, it is far less easy to suppress voices in the press. In the English language press, which is the national media, there are incidents of violence in one region which sometimes take 20 days to appear in a national newspaper. I mean, you still have that kind of a...
Madhava, I'm raising this issue with some kind of possibility, if you have, to use your term, topography. I mean, if you have the larger entity to contain all these differences, it's a little bit like, let's not say India, let's say South Asia as a entity. Right? And whether that would be a possibility.
South Asia.
And for instance, to reconcile all these...
See, it can be South Asia, it can even be larger than that, right?
The largest is already in place, called the United Nations.
No. See, European Union was formed now. Today's paper says Latvia has become a member of the Eurozone. Tomorrow somebody will become, Turkey is becoming whatever. So this is an expandable,
No, it's Ukraine.
Ukraine. So this is, see, these larger entities have no inherent character. They can change, they can expand, they can include new places. But those places are the ones that have the character, inherent character. See, you have a difference between alliances, units, economic or other kinds of NATOs or United Nations or ASEAN or whatever it is. These are larger entities which don't have an inherent character. They are economic in character. They are they're pragmatic. They are based on pursuit of interest, etc. But there are those entities which have inherent characters. That is, so the last of those entities, the highest of the entities which have inherent character, is the nation. Beyond the nation, there is nothing that has inherent character. Right? The caste has inherent character.
Even the notion of nation is the newly invention of the so-called inherent.
Yeah.
I mean, we use the example of Africa to begin with.
Yeah.
Because content within this has no inherence. Right?
Yeah.
Cut up the territory. So
No, exactly. No, so what I'm saying is that causes problems because there is no inherent character to that unit. Yeah, I mean, so in a way we are this what we are engaged in is like producing a diagnostic manual of political pathologies, if you like, right? A morphological sort of perversions or distortions and so on, which are, colonialism, post-colonial sort of, largely, right? So what happens when you do these kinds of arbitrary formations? So the idea is to be able to describe all of those different situations. My feeling is that each situation comes with a uniqueness. They're like the Tolstoy says, all happy families are alike, but every unhappy family is unhappy in its own unique way. This is the thing, your particular affliction has to be described in its specificity, because what components go into that thing is not normatively prescribable, right? But you have the norm as the one that it's like, for instance, in psychoanalytic terms, individual, for instance, like individuality. Now the modern nation state treats every one of us as individuals, right? It inherently has to do that, because this population, everybody is counted as one person, one vote, all kinds of things. Rights are given individually. But in many families, right, in Indian families, old families, for instance, you can't, that logic of individual rights cannot enter the family's insides, because there is another political order in which somebody else is in charge, and they will say you may have the right, the right given to you by the Indian government is not going to apply here, isn't it? So in that sense, that individual to have, you don't become an individual simply by the individual form being sort of introduced into a political. Subjectively, the person cannot assume the independent autonomy that an individual is supposed to have, given all of kinds of social realities. We know that, in so many, dependency, for instance, you don't want to be independent. You can only think of yourself as two, you and your somebody, right? Or you can only think of yourself as the servant of somebody, or the master of somebody, or the wife or the husband, and so on. There are many ways in which the form and the actualities clash, right? They don't, the lack of fit is there. And there is always a certain amount of suffering that results from that lack of fit, right? Which we live through. We don't, because it can never fit. And so on the national sort of plane, this is, I think, in the colonial moment, this is one of the pathologies that has been directly created historically by colonialism, is the formation of all kinds of arbitrarily entities, which are then given the name of nation state, and then there is a whole rigmarole that follows from that. So to describe it, but I feel that you can't describe it in larger terms. Once there are certain things you can say about the larger picture, some general statements, for instance, about the colonial origins of this particular problem. But having done that, the individual cases have to be taken.
Has to be studied historically.
In its own specific historical way. That's yeah.
Can I say something?
Yes, please.
But I'm not sure if my understanding is right, but if according to Indian movies I've seen, that the religious identities cause more killings than.
Yeah.
So are you comparing to propose linguistic identities as a kind of substitution?
In a way, yes. What I'm suggesting is.
So I'm saying that your proposed position is very India specific.
Yeah, India specific. You're right. That's true. So I feel it has to be specific, because each unit has its own distortions, its own specific qualities, historical, uniqueness of experience of historic, and so on. So you can't really handle this. For instance, India and Pakistan, right? Two came out of the same British India, so it became two countries now, and Bangladesh. If you take these three examples, very interesting case. India, whatever I have described, is Indian reality. Pakistan, also has different nationalities. They have Punjab, Sindh, Baluchistan, and so on, right? They have 4 or 5. They all also have their languages. But Pakistan adopted Urdu. Urdu was an Indian language, and even now it's there in India. It's one of the languages. But in India, Urdu doesn't have a national sort of status, official status. Pakistan, because Urdu was somehow had this vague association with Muslims and, socially speaking, even though actually Urdu was not a Muslim language, it is a language of administration in the North Indian regions. But Muslims adopted it. In Pakistan, Urdu became the national language. So while it is not the same as having Baluchi or Punjabi or Sindhi or as a language, it somehow has been less controversial. In India, Hindi as a national language is highly controversial because there are nationalities in India which are completely removed culturally from Hindi speaking area. They don't have anything in common except religion. So they can't get used to this idea of Hindi as they have resisted it. Whereas Pakistan has somehow managed to impose Urdu as a national language. So my idea is not to say that there is some ideal. If it works, you have resolved your problem, that's fine. I'm not quarreling with the thing. In India, we have not been able to resolve, and that means there is some reality that is resisting this. You cannot do it. So you have to find some way of getting over that problem. Bangladesh. Now, Bangladesh was part of Pakistan. Now, Pakistani government imposed Urdu on Pakistan, all Pakistan, right? But the Bangladeshis resisted. They said nothing doing. Because here, these Sindh and Punjab and Baluchistan and so on, they are together in the west. But East Pakistan, which is Bangladesh, it was 2000 miles away. And the only reason why it was made part of Pakistan is because both were ruled by British and both were Muslim dominated areas. So there was some absurd way in which. So obviously within 20 years or less, the whole thing collapsed and the Bangladesh became an independent because they said we are Bengalis. We are Muslims, but we are Bengalis. Our national language has to be Bengali. And West Pakistan said no, it has to be Urdu. You have to get rid of Bengali. And it led to in the 50s already there were riots. There were many people, students who were killed in this police firing on students who were demanding Bengali national language, in Bangladesh. And then in 1970, this war breaks out and Bangladesh becomes a free country. So you see how each of them has a unique history, because it's not possible to see. On the other hand, Bengal is divided into Indian part and Bangladesh. There is a Bengal in India and there is a Bengal outside India. So Muslim and so unique sort of developments given the various kind of historical sort of situations. So in that for that reason, I think it is necessary to work with the given thing to see what is the way to handle these questions. It causes problems. Yes. For instance, new problems. For instance, one of the problems is different language nationalities will say that part is actually ours. They'll try to claim land from the neighboring states and so on. But that problem has actually been addressed. It's reasonable. It's because in India these differences are not absolute differences. They are not, except in Kashmir and Northeast. The other places in India, the differences are not the kind. They will not turn into military hostilities. They are not that kind. There will be agitations, but they will be they are negotiable differences. These linguists, claims on territory and all that are not so powerful that they will, lead to breakaway, and so on. Except of course Kashmir. For instance, Kashmir, they want independence, and unfortunately, the Indian government is not treating it, giving it the right kind of policy treatment, and so the Northeast also. But the rest of it, they are not, is sort of ready to take arms to make a nation. Essentially what it means is, you have a constitution, you have a republican democracy, but is the thing working properly? Are people able to participate in the fullest way and to live these kinds of new freedoms that are associated with this new political ideal? That's all. And it's there that this question. And a lot of people do discuss it, but they discuss it only in relation to education. They say you must, every child should have education in their mother tongue. So they associate it with the mother tongue, which I feel is a wrong idea, because mother tongue is, it's like, again it becomes a culture, your culture, your language and so on. But many people who live in different states, they adapt to the new state, new language quite happily. It's not such a huge problem as long as your mother tongue is there for your education. The state language, political language is necessary. You have to learn the language of the state in which you live, right, to participate in the political life. That's all. It's a simple thing. I mean, when you as an idea, it's a simple thing, but in practice, you need basically to be able to put together policies which are based on a understanding of the actual situation on the ground, and there is a class dimension to it. The protection of English privileges of the Anglophone class. That is one of the factors which is the basic resistances from that. There are people whose interests are so closely tied with the maintaining the English, and for the sake of a very small minority, the entire population of India has to suffer this peculiar situation of everything from courts to administration to education to market, everything functioning in English, for just to benefit a small group of people who have a vested interest in maintaining their English privileges. It's a completely unjust kind of and violative of all the principles which we have adopted in the form of a constitution. Why? So it's blatant. It's quite the languages. See, the Indian state, Nehru's regime, tried to postpone this idea. They said, not today, we'll do it some other time, and so on. But the states, there was a lot of agitations. So finally what happened was, in 1956, and for some period, starting from 53, 56, and then going out to 70, 60, for over a period of time, linguistic states were formed, right? So you do have linguistic states, but what happens is, because everything operates in these sort of English, there is no sort of the motivation for functioning in the regional language is a political motivation, right? To enable the largest possible participation in the political life, right? Now that has been neglected. So you teach the regional language under very bad conditions, without much development of textbooks, and without the economy functioning in that language, because the economy functions in English, without the administration functioning in that language, without the courts and other things functioning in that language. So there is no incentive for this to actually develop as a full-fledged thing. So everybody, so what has happened is, the government schools, which used to be excellent schools, but they are neglected because nobody, the middle class, doesn't want to go there, because they want to learn English and get to that thing. So they go into these private schools, and so the government schools become completely neglected. They go down the drain. They are bad buildings, no chairs for children to sit on, worst, leaking roofs and all kinds of miserable conditions. So nobody cares. So the vast majority are left to either go to such schools or drop out. So effectively, even though you introduced the regional languages in the 56 period, the other policies have led to the destruction of that whole.
But people still learn to use it through daily life.
In daily life, yes, but it's becoming less and less important to people, in their lives. So it becomes, so it's a generation, it could possibly within a couple of generations, nobody will know the language well enough except to speak a little, There's that kind of a situation. So on the other hand, if that was the, this is the, you're talking about the educated class, but the uneducated, the ones who are less educated, those who drop out in high school or so on, those people, they only know that language. So their ability to, go beyond their little narrow confines is severely restricted by this fact. So they can't participate even in their own state's political life, right? Because, they've been left behind in this. So this double, logic is.
What if India continues to exist as a nation? India as a nation continues to exist.
Yeah.
And so that therefore a unified language is still needed. What do you suppose that will be if English is not the best?
So it can be. That's what I'm saying is it can be English also. It doesn't matter. What I'm saying, it doesn't matter. Whichever is suitable. You can say two also. You can say English, or you can say English and Hindi. It makes no difference. What is necessary? See, the idea. In my thinking, there are two problems, both of which need to be addressed. One is political existence. That means becoming politically that new citizen, that of a new nation state, right? That's what your constitution says you have to get, right? And you have to have all the equipment, you have to have the education, you have to have the critical skills, you have to have the language in which to express yourself, and you should be able to access the courts, the administration, education in some way. So to strengthen and establish your political existence as new citizen. So because in the older time you didn't have political existence, you were just oppressed by some foreign power, right? Your political existence was one of subjection to you are not free. So this political existence means in the new situation, which is supposed to be democratic and republican, are you a citizen or not? In the substantial sense. Legally, yes, everybody, the law says everybody is a citizen. But in practical terms, that citizenship has to be realized through various things, right? And I'm saying existence of a language in which you can educate yourself, in which the economy is run, in which the schools and administration and justice is run, courts are run, is a requirement for full realization of citizenship. Yeah, this is the one. Now India has one more problem which is to address, which is political coexistence. That is, this whole thing, so many different people, they all have to find a way to live together, to be a unity. Now, one model of thinking, for instance, Rabindranath Tagore, we read, something in the beginning, of Rabindranath Tagore, where he says, the provinces should, work on their region, and then you must establish a center. So, in Rabindranath Tagore's model, he says provinces, province 1, province 2, province 3, right? These are nationalities, these linguistic nationalities. So what they will do is they will work on the substance, the people, to modernize. But then together they will constitute a center This is his model. This is something he proposed in 1908. So, existence is ensured first, a new existence, transformed subjectivity, and then coexistence is then worked for, right? So, how to coexist as a Indian larger unity. In the Gandhian thing, what happens is, in the 20th century nationalism, as it picks up speed, coexistence becomes the dominant concern. This is neglected. That is, how to keep India together at all costs. That is the primary thing. How will India be one unit? And therefore, all the efforts are put into this. So here, see, in Tagore's model, if you talk about political agency, where is the agency located in this? See, there is a center, there are provinces, and there are, let us say, districts, villages, etc., right? So there are 3 stages, 1, 2, 3. In Tagore's model, political agency is located here, the real modern political agency, that is the democratic agency, which creates a new kind of subject in the modern spirit, right? That is located here in this tier, not here or here. Gandhi, for instance, says villages are the real India. So he says political agency, in some ways he locates in the village. But actually speaking, in practical terms, Gandhi, Nehru, everybody in the national movement, for them political agency is completely located here at the center, which is already given. British rule has already created a center. So you are assuming that center will have all the political agency, and these are basically the provincial instruments through which this work will be done. So from here power will flow, our agency will flow through the provinces into the thing. So the province has no character of its own. It's only a medium, it's a medium sector. So political coexistence dominates the consciousness of the national movement. And therefore, they are always thinking which is the language of India rather than this other question. And as I said earlier, they obviously you need a national a language at that level, at the central level, but there is no need for it to have some emotional tie. But they insist that it should have an emotional tie. But at the level of coexistence, they try to bring in what is essentially a kind of affective dimension, which is actually functioning only at the linguistic nationality level. So they want to bring that into this coexistence sort of plane, and that's where the kind of distortions happen. So that's where they see one fact of the matter is English continues to dominate today, but the difference is today English dominates socially. If you use it as a purely federal language, it has no social role. It has only a communicative role.
But it also dominates psychologically, because recently there is an Indian movie that's talking about the English position.
Yeah.
The woman.
Yeah, English, yeah.
Yeah, right. So I'm thinking that the English part is the biggest problem in India.
No, but that's what I'm saying.
As a language, but as a kind of cultural, political.
That's what. So, because you didn't solve the problem, English has become a language of aspiration. All aspirations are, English related. All aspirations. That is why the regional languages are neglected, because nobody wants them, because they are useless for all your whatever you want to aspire for in life. This is what has happened. So in other words, English is socially still powerful. If
That is the biggest problem.
that is the biggest problem. So, if you have English as a language of coexistence, it doesn't have the same role. Its role becomes not social but technical. Like English is now required in many countries where they don't for various purposes. So this is the kind of thing, eliminating a social role for English, but keeping it in if required in other places. Which anyway everybody is doing. I mean, even the European big nations are now learning English because it's just a global language. It's become, that's also a historical specificity. It's nothing to do with how history has fared. English British colonialism was the most powerful of the British Empire was the most, and so you are seeing the effects of that in the era of globalization, where English sort of is wrenched out of its national British or American context and becomes a kind of, like if you listen to airport announcements in English, right? In every airport in the world, there are announcements in English, and this is not British English. It's not a national language anymore. It is some kind of vague thing. It's neither the accent nor the vocabulary nor anything can you identify with a nation.
Computer English.
It's computer, yeah, exactly. It's computer. It's something, and that's because it's a medium of global existence. The new globalized world. There is some. So it can be treated as almost like a code, a kind of code with which different people, different nationalities are able to interact with each other in a globalized economic context, right?
I don't know. For me, English will constantly keep the social role anyway because it's, as you say in your article, actually that's the language of the market.
Yeah.
The language of capitalism. So the global world. So anyway, it will constantly impact on the province, even on the level, because the province, they want to get a market in such part of the world. So
Yeah.
So I don't know if you can just take English as a code because.
No, it's an economic. See, it's an economic skill, economically beneficial skill.
Yeah, actually, it's an advantage for India to know English quite well, on the market point of view.
No, see, that's the thing. It's not an advantage for India. It's an advantage for certain people.
Yeah, but I mean, if we talk in the name of seeing the capitalists of this country, then in India there are more English speakers, and it has been said that it's actually good for them in terms of market.
No, that's what it's good for. If you equate English speaking people with India as a whole, then it's, but it's not, because you see how, supposing you are speaking Hindi, right? Everybody, and those Hindi speaking people, some people learn English better than others, and they get better economic opportunities, right? That's a different situation. But supposing you have a place where everybody speaks Hindi, but 2% of the people speak English, and they get all the benefits, that's different. You see, these are two different situations. That's what you have here.
The way that English is just a tool, or it's on the superficial level, is the privileged class
Yeah.
choose to use. Or,
Yeah.
maybe at home they have their own language, not necessarily.
No. Increasingly, there's an Anglophone class which has no other language also.
Yeah, that's their loss.
Yeah, but that's a cultural loss. You see, this is the thing. It's a cultural loss, but you can compensate with the cultural gain of some other kind. It's up to them to evaluate, right? They feel quite comfortable with that, right?
But if they want to, to look at it another way, if they want to sort of, in a globalized world, if you want to have a bigger market,
Yeah.
growingly there are people looking at India in such a way.
Mm.
For the ones who know the local language better,
Yeah.
they get it's a niche for them.
No,
to
so
run
yeah,
back into
you are absolutely
the
right.
market.
You're absolutely right. But however, it is interesting to note historically that in India, it is the foreign multinationals who first spoke to the people in their language. that is capitalism, and only global capitalism, not Indian capitalists, who made this, pitch to the people, in their language. So today you have mobiles, phones, where they are trying to introduce Google. Google has done more to develop Indian language software than any Indian company, right? This is the thing. This is absolutely what, it's the multinationals, because the multinationals belong to countries where they assume that, they must be speaking that language. But in fact here, what is happening is, it's still a developing story. I mean, so, one can't, make any, but this is a new reality, in the sense that what capitalism is doing in this way is that it is actually creating a new kind of class in this regional languages, right? In these languages, where people see, earlier, if you didn't know English, you were just inferior. Today, thanks to global capitalism, you feel that even you have, somebody is addressing you also. It's actually true. I mean, whatever you might think of that somebody addresses you also, no matter that it's a Coca-Cola company or somebody, it addresses you, right? You have, and so you actually have, that's why I was speaking earlier about the Asianization of India, a kind of, there is a new class which can only speak their local language, but they are good at everything. All the new technology and all this Google world, they know everything. They can, they can access various information and so on, but they can't speak English. So the old hierarchy, social hierarchy, which was English-based hierarchy, is now there is a new class which doesn't belong, which is breaking that logic, but then it's the infrastructure is still oriented to that old system. Indian administrative and cultural and other kinds of systems, they are still oriented to that. So there is a kind of conflict emerging, if you like, from precisely this kind of.
The old systems, so we can imagine that, very soon these old systems will be outdated.
Yeah.
The new ones building on will very soon replace them. The existing.
No, how? I mean, in the sense that replacement is always, it's never something that just happens by itself, right? It happens through the emergence of conflicts, the contradictions that cannot be resolved easily, the tensions, the even wars, and this is how things come to a head and get resolved into some new reality, right? But currently it's still sort of basically, multiple logics sort of emerging and clashing, but not clashing in the same, say, transformative way, but somehow, tensions beginning to have, sort of emerge. So where it will go, it's, I mean, obviously it is, some transformation is definitely, I think, there in the future, but what, how it will happen and all that,
Movie star, one movie star interview on CNN. He's now have this talk show.
Ah,
You know what I mean?
yeah, Amir Khan.
Very. The show seems to be very influential.
This is Satyameva Jayate, the Amir Khan.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is, I don't know if he has revived the show, but he did a show which was a very popular show, in which he took up social issues, various social issues in the Indian context. And well, I mean, because he is such a popular film star, so this was considered a very effective way of communicating new ideas to the larger public through television, because everybody will watch Amir Khan. So he would have his own take, and it was one of those. It was popular, because it was novelty. Nobody had done that kind of a show before, where a film star takes up social issues on TV and discusses. And of course, he comes across as the person who is wise and all that. But obviously, people are writing these shows for him, right? But he.
Is it a transformative force? Something like those.
I doubt that it's a transformative force. You know, it's not that. It's a kind of you know, the. It's a, if you like, it's a kind of NGO type of education of the public education type thing. You know, it's very much actually the behind the scenes. The people who are actually writing the show or giving the ideas for the show and all that are the NGOs and other concerned citizens. So that kind of a circulation of ideas has been happening through various channels. This is just a new channel for doing that. You know, new avenue using the star. And not many stars are actually willing to take that kind of a position. He is unique because he, in some ways, his whole persona is somebody, you know, a socially concerned kind of figure. He's built up that image, and so he does that. Yeah.
In this semester, I listen a lot of, thinking from India, but I just want to, learning this thinking and this knowledge, try to observe the Philippine situations.
Philippine.
Because I think because we talk a lot of times in the class.
Yeah.
And I just thinking about that before you said that global capitalism. Just made me thinking about why Philippines cannot be stronger. Because before he colonial by United States. But how he cannot getting stronger. Inside that society, of course, we know that greedy, the government is very greedy, and poor people. But thinking about if they get educated, the whole people, if they get educated, they can study, graduate from the university. Right here, the people who work in a factory or who are caregivers, their degree is higher than Indonesian workers.
Oh.
But I don't want to compare, but that is very, and besides, the Philippine situation is, when they were in kindergarten, they started just learning English, Tagalog in their mother tongue. I mean, Tagalog, Visayas, and English both together. So I think that's why they can work around the world, because English, especially Canada and US, Hong Kong, and Malaysia. But I'm just thinking about why they cannot get higher and why they cannot stay inside their country to do something or just make. Why they have to go outside to earn money and do the lower class job and that companies or the employers just took them away. They don't have to waste time. It seems like I in this the whole semester I think some of the way between Philippines and India it's the same but some is different. The same is before the colonial. Just like a small kingdom in India, but in Philippines it's a small average, just like Taiwan Aboriginal people. They have their own life, own languages, and they're also fighting for each other, for the hunting on the land. But since the since the Spanish and U.S. decided to colonial name, everything just changed. And some of these Spanish leave, like the power, the right of the economy. So that's why the Philippine politics is very, very unstable. Because every soldiers, the generals, just represent one economy. And so it's just like Latin American countries, and so it just made me keep thinking about it. And India, I think the India and So that's why I just, just kind of try to find a way to critical that, because when I was use Taiwanese or the China way to see, to thinking about the Philippine situation, I cannot find a way until I get inside your class. So that is, I think I found a way, but still have to keep in understanding it. So, and finally, I'm happy that this semester you come here and you just let us know about Asia and other places in the around. And because we don't have any chances to discuss Japan style, Japan's situation, Korea's situation, China, Indonesia, especially India, and well, a lot of Asian countries we don't know yet, but we just right now we know, so we can just try to thinking about and try to make it understanding what is Asia and what happened before colonial and after colonial until now. And try and make us can understand more about Asia.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I must say, India, there is hardly any, except in maybe some one university which has international studies and other types of departments. There is not much understanding of the rest of the Asian world, especially east of India. So, yeah, unfortunately, we also in our universities, they don't have provision for, like I come here, they don't have provisions for bringing people there except in Delhi. So that way, it's for me, this interaction is only possible outside, coming outside of India. Yeah. Yeah. Well, in a way, yes. Sorry, you said you were saying.
I don't know, but it's about because we spoke a lot about India, but I don't know with Pakistan. For me, seems a kind of key. If we understand the situation of Pakistan today and the difference of trajectory, it will become more clear. Because even when you speak about like changing the form through the language, actually it means you first have to break the border between Pakistan and India, because the language are actually aware, or maybe not anymore, but they were the same, also, the same person. So I was wondering, besides the state, actually are there people who try to make, because this border seems actually you cannot cross it. It's hate, and it will be for a long, long time.
No. It's not really like that. It's not really, because there are, I used to be a member of Indo-Pak Friendship something association. I'm not there anymore. Where some Pakistanis would come here, we would go there. And now India and Pakistan have a rail link, a bus link, and all that. So efforts are there, and people, for instance, Pakistani comedians, stand-up comics, they are the best. India doesn't have good stand-up comics, but this Pakistan has brilliant stand-up comics, and they always come to India. Then Sufi ghazal singers, musically, music and stand-up comedy and all that, they come. Pakistani TV serials are very popular in India, and Indian, this Bollywood is obviously very popular in Pakistan. So, and whoever has gone to Pakistan, people, when they contact people, they are very friendly. There's no tension at all between people. They don't. From India, they are not hostile to you. They are in fact so extra hospitable if they find out that you are from India. So there's not. But this military confrontation over the borders, this is very strong, and every few months it flares up. You have some fighting in those snowy mountains of thing, and then and then all kinds of things happen. Cricket matches are cancelled, and the stand-up comics are asked to go home, and all kind of.
That's what I mean, because these conflicts, which are like recurrently
Yeah.
they are actually essential for the nation form.
Yeah, essential to them. So India and Pakistan survive because they have this each other to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, they do have that. I mean, I suppose, this kind of tension is nations always, this idea that nations always require an enemy, so that your unity is dependent on saying, we are not, they are different from us, and they are our enemies, or something like that. But this there is a, if you like, a limit to that, in the sense that it is the degree to which the nation state form has established itself, consolidated itself, which will allow for those things to remain, but on a lower sort of key, not high pitched, not constant military hostility, but some other level of cultural, abusing each other, telling jokes about that level, it gets reduced, and under such ideal circumstances. But those don't prevail everywhere, right? So every few months, one soldier gets killed on that side or this side, and so on. This is the level at which it is. So, for instance, it's in the beginning, from 47 to 71, right? 57, 67, about 25 years after independence, you had a series of big wars in India, Pakistan. But since 71, there have only been these small confrontations. There have been there is no war. So in that sense, I don't know whether it's a.
I don't know, because I understood it's more spread war, because the thing is now, the terrorists are coming from Pakistan.
No, but even in spite of the fact that terrorists are coming from.
People say,
Yeah. I mean,
What the Americans say.
No, the Indians say that's what.
Indians say that.
It's like they don't, no, the Pakistan are closer from the American in certain way. So.
No. Indian understanding is that terrorists come from Pakistan, and Pakistan has become a terrorist sort of haven. It's not only the India side, the Afghanistan side also. Basically, Pakistan, certain areas of Pakistan are not under government control anymore. I don't know. Osama was living in Rawalpindi, the capital of Pakistan. A few meters away from the parliament. There is. So that's Pakistan's peculiar problem. It's a country that's also struggling to emerge out of because it's one of the interesting things about it is Pakistan. When Pakistan was formed, the religious Muslim leaders did not want Pakistan. This is one of the things one should understand about Pakistan. That the mullahs, the real religious leaders, they didn't want Pakistan. Who wanted Pakistan? It's the middle class, the educated people. Jinnah is Jinnah never prayed in his life probably. He was a thoroughly secular, anglicized, westernized fellow. It was people like him who wanted Pakistan. The reason being why the religious people didn't want Pakistan is that in India, the religious leaders have ultimate control over Muslim masses. In Pakistan, the religious leaders will be competing with the state for mass appeal, mass thing. They didn't want to compete. They didn't want a state to compete with them for the minds of the Muslims, right? They didn't want it. But once it happened, they did. And in the beginning, you will see that Jinnah, Liaquat Ali Khan, Munir, Muhammad Munir, the Chief Justice, first Chief Justice, there are a series of people. They are all completely convinced that Pakistan is a secular state just like India. That that there will be Hindus living in Pakistan and alongside the Muslims and other tribal and other populations, and they will all live like in the same. There is no doubt about in their minds. But at the same time, these religious groups are increasing the pressure to make an Islamic kind of state. And finally, it's in the 70s with Ziaul Haq and that period that this becomes a reality, that Pakistan increasingly turns towards the Islamic state kind of model. I mean, it was already there, but there was substantial resistance from this from the class that won independence for Pakistan. They wanted a secular state, modern state, but they lost in essentially. And since then, Bhutto's assassination, beheading of people, it's become this dysfunctional state, right? It's not that way. India is functioning better than Pakistan, because Pakistan is trapped between this Indian geopolitical sort of interests and the whole global American interests in the Central Asia and Afghanistan and all these kinds of things. This conflict between Soviet Union and America over Afghanistan, which was a very prolonged thing, where one of the most in the Cold War period, Afghanistan was one of the sites of confrontation between these two, because the Soviets had full control over Afghanistan, and even when they left, they put their own man there. And in those days, it was amazing. People, American intellectuals, used to write about Afghanistan as if it was their country. Joan Didion wrote about Afghanistan, and so on. So they tried. So they were, for them, Pakistan was an ally, because through Pakistan they could try and recapture, to snatch from the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union, so they had so Pakistan got caught up in that thing, and the Islamic sort of terrorism or other kinds of fundamentalist activities were encouraged by the US, and they continue to be fester there. I mean, it's well known that it was all Osama and others are a product of US geopolitical strategies, right? Central Asian oil and all these kinds of things. So Pakistan is very unfortunately completely dysfunctional at this moment. There is no the other thing about it, Pakistan, there is this aristocracy. Pakistan's middle class is a rather empty space there. It's this Muslim, very devout religious masses, and then this aristocracy. This is Pakistani aristocracy is something, it's very different from. So their social structure also sort of seems to, because contribute to this militarism. So the aristocracy wants to somehow re-establish secular law and all that, right? But the military dictators are always coming in with Islamic and other kinds of agendas and so on. So it's, I don't understand it fully, but I would say it's a dysfunctional. It's just collapsing. It's some kind of sorry story. And I think a lot of Indians feel that vindicated. They're saying we are much better off than our neighbors and so on. But in a way, it can't. It's true.
What cannot it be reunified? Because that's what I think. Because in a way, from what I see, I say that if you really, I know it's not possible under this constance of the nation state. But if you try to think differently, you have to think of some kind of reunification between Pakistan and India, which doesn't fit the nation form. But they have to be together somehow.
No, so this is one of the things. At the time of independence, there was a move saying that to prevent division, they said provinces will be separate and they can form blocks. That is, Muslim provinces as a block and Hindu provinces, they can form big blocks within the larger picture. Now, this was a solution based on the idea that linguistic provinces are the units. But that's the thing, religion prevailed finally, and that's why, the division happened. In fact, Maulana Kalam Azad, who is one of the big Muslim leaders in the Congress, he is proposing this also, because he, as a Congress leader, he is against partition, and he is suggesting this kind of a move to allow for blocks to form within the larger entity. But effectively, the other question that many people ask, and for which I don't have an answer, but there seems to be a serious question, which is, how can such a large and such a diverse entity survive without constant conflicts? Is it? Huh? India, yeah, and even a larger one than at present, right? That's the thing. Because then people started to think that maybe having a largely homogeneous Hindu population with a smaller minority Muslim, is better than having two powerful religious communities constantly in conflict, where democracy has very little chance to sort of function normally.
But democracy is conflict too.
Yeah, but not religious conflict. Democratic conflict cannot be religious conflict. Takes different shapes, right? Forms, right? I mean, it takes you in different directions. So it doesn't. It's not conducive to democratic functioning. The democratic functioning has to happen on the basis of some, understanding of national that you are a nation, first of all. That something unites you, which transcends all your other identities. But if you are saying there are two nations, Muslim and Hindu, and they will live together, that's that is where these are difficult problems to. Yeah. That's the colonial legacy. You can't get away from it, and that's your until new forms come into existence. New ways of organizing your political life. It's you're with living with it.
How many provinces have tried to go for independence?
How many provinces? No. Well, independence claims are Kashmir today. Today, Kashmir, and there are some. See, in the northeast, there used to be a lot of independence movements, Nagas and Mizos, etc. Now they have been pacified. They have somehow been, sort of they have been reduced to small. They are not as powerful as they were in the past. Those the freedom movements of the Mizos and the Nagas. In Assam also there is one, but these are in Punjab, right? Punjab, there was a Khalistan movement which was a very, lasted for a couple of decades and was very violent, and which basically culminated in the assassination of Indira Gandhi. That's. Tamil Nadu in the south wanted to, but that was before independence. After independence, they quickly became reconciled to becoming an Indian state. So Assam, there's a little bit of these things. So these are, in all the outlying areas, there are, constantly. So that is one kind, which is claims for separate, independent nations. That is one kind of thing. But the more common thing, which happens in practically every place, is autonomy, right? Separate separate linguistic provinces and ethnic provinces, and autonomy for governments in those provinces, etc. This is a very common thing. So, for instance, in West Bengal, there is a Nepali Gurkha population, Nepalis by ethnic origin, who are in that Darjeeling, that hill station area, Darjeeling region, and they have been struggling for a separate state for now for 30-40 years. Finally, they were given some special status. Now they are not a separate state, but they have autonomy, some kind of regional autonomy. Telangana is, in my Hyderabad, Telangana, is a Telugu-speaking area, but wants to separate from the other part of, because they feel that their province has been denied various benefits and so on. So that is happening. So like that, there are things going on, and that's been a long story always. And the third kind of thing is that within these things there is a kind of popular sort of ethnic fundamentalist developments, which are a reaction to the globalization scenario. Wherever there are big cities, right? Bombay, Bangalore, these are two places where this is seen a lot. What happens is, in these cities, the cities become completely taken over by the global economy, right? And so the people who live there, the city becomes a very cosmopolitan area where the local language is reduced to minor status, because English becomes the thing. And so you see the development of certain kinds of reactions to that, and nationalistic sort of formations which come up. They're in Bombay they are very powerful. This thing called Maharashtra Navanirman Samiti, Maharashtra Reconstruction Forum or something like that, which makes all kinds of things. It says that every taxi driver should learn Marathi, the language of the state, because a lot of people are coming from the north to Bombay, because it's a huge, big, India's biggest metropolis, right? Everybody comes there, and they sort of live by themselves, the Biharis, the North Indians, and they have their own culture, but they are very integral to the economy of Bombay, because without them Bombay cannot function, because they do all kinds of essential services, like these dabbawalas, this lunchbox. Bombay has this amazing phenomenon of lunch being delivered to the people working people from their homes. They pick up, and this is millions of lunch boxes are accurately delivered to the right people every day, and then picked up, and the empty ones delivered back on a daily basis. This is all done by these Biharis from the north. No, they have, it's a huge apparatus. You can't do it on scooters. It's like literally million, with lorries and other things. So it requires logistical finesse, extremely sophisticated logistical thinking to work this out, right? And they do it. They're all peasant, sort of background people who come started this on a small scale. It grew and grew bigger and bigger. And taxi, huh?
Make their order every day, or is there regular order? So they deliver.
No, it's from homes. From
Yeah.
home.
To deliver home box to you.
So I leave my home and I go to work.
Without
My wife prepares my lunch at 9 o'clock in the morning, 9:10, thing, because it has to come fresh. So the dabbawala picks it up and puts it in some and it is delivered to your office, my office, at 1 o'clock for lunchtime.
Yeah, but I mean, is it a contract basis?
Yeah, they're paid for their service every monthly.
Yeah, monthly.
It's a monthly payment. Yeah. It's a thoroughly well organized.
There is a film about that.
Huh?
There is a film about that. Just
Film. Yeah. It's right. Yeah, Dabbawala. It's a film. Recently has come out. Yeah, Lunchbox. It's called. You should see it. It's really something.
What's the name?
Lunchbox. Yeah. So like that, but this MNS says these people should learn Marathi, or they should leave, and so on. They make threatening. So they are also speaking for people who feel that Marathi has been ignored in the soil where Marathi is the main language. So what happens is, in the 50s, the linguistic nationality demand was made by educated people, that is the bourgeoisie of the region, and the states were formed. After that, this bourgeois element dissociated itself from the language claim. It became part of the national bourgeoisie. So today, the people who raise this kind of nationality claim are not from the bourgeoisie. They are from the working class and various petty traders, petty bourgeois sort of sections, and it is not based on a great knowledge of the language also. Some of them don't even know the language properly. But so linguistic pride becomes ethnic pride. It's a different thing. It becomes a virulent form. It's easy to ostracize it, to say that it's some bad thing, evil, and so on. But it's actually the pathological version of what was actually at another time a democratic demand, right? So there's nothing wrong in saying that everybody in this state speaks this language, functions in this language, but it doesn't have to be done in this way, which is threatening people, beating them up, and so on. But it wasn't done in that other way, which was possible 40 years ago, 50 years ago, when it should have been done. So that's your.
Professor, talking back about the separatist movement in India. These regions, like if they're aiming for independent, wouldn't they be asking for a democratic demand? Like in Indonesia's case, I remember the East Timor.
Yeah.
Through referendum in 1998 or 1999, I don't really remember. I was still very young at that time. But it was through a democratic demand that they wanted to be like from Indonesia, and it was successful.
They became separate.
They became separate, but then the aftermath was that the president was totally condemned by the whole, the popular population, saying that it was stupid of him,
to have seceded.
Yeah, to actually allow such referendum to take place in the first place. So what about India itself?
But that's interesting. But obviously, the referendum, the majority said yes.
Yeah, exactly.
So who are the ones who then say it is a stupid thing? They're obviously a minority interest.
So like in newspapers or in news debates, like they would condemn the decision of the president at that time who allowed that.
Yeah. No, so it means that there is a interest, the conflict of interests, right? There are interests which want separate stating. There are interests which don't want it, right? I mean, in India, during the independence struggle, there were many people who didn't want independence. So that's also there. I mean, it's not, all the elite, the Indian princes and all that, they said, why separate India? British are ruling very well, and so on. There are many people who are. So there one makes a choice, right? Well, there's nothing you can do about that. But coming back to the referendum sort of thing, at the time of independence, technically it was supposed to be the case that every province, every kingdom, there are a lot of these small kingdoms which were retained by the British as they were, without change. The kings, they didn't have much power, but they're just symbolically there. And there are some big ones which were powerful also, like Hyderabad, like Mysore, Baroda, etc. So technically they were all supposed to have the freedom to choose whether to join the union or be separate. But actually, in practice, the Indian national movement, the leaders, the Nehru, the Sardar Patel and others, they didn't want to give any freedom to choose like that. They said nothing doing, you have to join. And most of them were small, so they joined. But Hyderabad, which was ruled by a Muslim, Nizam, wanted to be independent. But because it was a Muslim ruler and the majority population was Hindu, the Indian government said nothing, and went to war. In fact, many people were killed when Indian troops, entered Hyderabad and occupied and integrated it into India. So it was done by force. Now the thing about the referendum sort of thing is, it requires a certain kind of economic advance, I believe. That's my understanding of it. Like in Canada, the French and the English, they have a conflict. But it's very so what am I say? Things happen by referendum and other sorts of processes there, right? Because there is no great dominating thing. The English dominates over the French in a kind of effective way, not because they have some colonial relation with each other, But in India, that's not possible to, you know, even conceive referendums like that in, you know, because Indian unity is a, you know, lot of stakes in maintaining Indian unity. You know. And people, see, in the old days it might have been just a small minority, but today even ordinary people have a stake in the unity of India in large parts, except in the northeast, as I said, and Kashmir and Punjab and so on. A lot of people have a stake in maintaining the unity. But within the unity, there is a desire to be, you know, to be able to live your life without this social sort of oppression that language causes or other things cause. Yeah, that's I would say how.
Recently, I read some essays written by the Chinese intellectual Zhang Junmai. Do you know that? Do you know?
I'm not. I don't think I know.
And who is the crucial person to draft the Constitution of the Republic of China? And when the Chinese Communist Party built the People's Republic of China in 1949, and Zhang Junmai went to India from 1949 to 1952. And at that time, he gave some lectures in Delhi and Madras and Bangalore.
Oh, okay.
And his political position was against the Chinese Communist Party and Chiang Kai-shek, and belongs to the so-called third force, 第三势力.
Okay.
And in 1956, he published the book named China and the Gandhians India.
Okay. Oh, this is the same, that paper that, not that part. Okay.
And,
Sorry.
which collect the lectures when he visit India. And he wished to push the cultural understandings between India and China. And he also published the book, the name is The Development of Neo-Confucian Thought, and in 1957. And I really not understand the details. I think that the class is important to me to understand the thought in India, and it will help me to understand what kinds of India that Zhang Junmai had thought and the connection with the Neo-Confucian's thought. And I think that it is the class is maybe will help me to do that. Yes.
Oh, I said so the relation between Gandhian and Neo-Confucian in the Chinese context, or what similarities or commonness? Huh? Yeah, it's an interesting thing too. Yeah, certainly.
Maybe something.
Yeah, can I have that name? I mean,
Is a on the left, but not a communist.
not a communist.
Kind of social democrat.
Okay.
Something like
Socialist, like Ram Manohar Lohia in India or somebody. Right? Yeah, non-confrontational ways of, yeah. So progressive, kind of Fabian socialist or kind of progressive ideas with this critical traditionalism as a possible ingredient, right? Nandi and...
but these are the new Confucianists are not so critical.
They're not so critical. Okay.
They're not so critical to the They stick to the kind of modernize the Confucius text,
Okay.
still based on the textual.
I see.
His name is spelled differently. Yes. I write it down.
His English name is Carson Chang Cha.
Ah, Carson Chang Chia. Chang Chia. Okay. Yeah, I want to look this up. I'm interested in this question. I see. Thank you.
actually have a very simple question. I'm not sure it's appropriate to propose here. Did India has ever been through this kind of Cold War regime, or it seems like India has a very different experiences during 1950s.
50s.
Yeah. And I was actually thinking about the differences between during 1950s between like East Asia and or in Taiwan compared to India's experiences, or did India has different experiences during 1950s? To put it simply, did India has ever experienced this Cold War structure compared to?
Cold War structure very much is a factor in how India finally turns out, in the sense that obviously Nehruvian, there are pro-US and pro-Soviet forces in India at the time of independence. There is a Swatantra party, which is a pro-capitalist party, pro-American, in terms of its larger vision. Whereas the Congress under Nehru is somewhat inclined to friendship with the Soviet Union. Socialism, they adopt this term socialism. So socialism means a certain kind of, as if you are participating in the international socialist bloc. But Nehru, in his statements, he went to the US very soon after he became Prime Minister of independent India, and in his speeches there, he says, we do not want to be on this side or that side of this Cold War. We don't want to take sides against, between. We want to be a non-aligned country, and also that is the period in the 50s when this Bandung, happens, and subsequently the non-aligned movement is sort of created by, and Nehru plays a big role in that. But if you look at it in retrospect, non-aligned movement is not it's not really a strong third force or anything like that. It is just it's an initiative, if you like, which in some ways tries to bring the people of certain newly independent countries together, newly independent also, those who are not on either side of these things, with some kind of common agenda. This is also the time when slowly the idea of a third world begins to develop, and so on. So today there is something called BRICS. It's a new thing. What is it? Brazil, India, China, and South Africa. Some kind of but in those days it was Egypt, India, various countries like that, right? But in later years, India became more and more Soviet, a strong ally of Soviet Union. So while on the one hand there was a non-aligned movement, but on the other hand it was very much a Soviet. So that also has geopolitical reasons, which is Pakistan was in American hands, and so India went with. So US was heavily funding Pakistan militarily, and economically and other ways. So India sort of goes with the Soviet Union. So many benefits to India from the Soviet sort of alliance, but also it's not in a way it destroys the communists in India totally. The Soviet Union is backing the Congress government. The communists cannot do much except go along with the story. They civilize like that, and that's one of the reasons why Communist Party in India keeps splitting, because the main party is supporting Congress and following the Soviet line all the time. So that it's kind of continues like that for a long time. Under Indira Gandhi, it's Soviet relations are very strong, very strong. And 1971 in the Bangladesh war, again, America supported Pakistan, right? And in fact, the American fleets came right up to this Arabian Sea, the very close to the Indian borders, like like a threat. They said, if anything, if Pakistan wants us to enter the war, we are willing, kind of thing. But and that was again the time when India sort of went into the war on behalf of Bangladesh, because Bangladeshi refugees were flooding into India. So there was a reason, they had a good reason to enter into the war. They entered, and Bangladesh was liberated and so on. So at that time, that was the high point. After that, it becomes Soviet Union itself goes into decline. So that story.
In a way, India was at the beginning moment of the Cold War.
Yeah, exactly. Post Second World War.
So the British did not intervene in this process, right? I mean, supposedly he's on this camp, right? With a capitalist bloc.
No, British had a presence also. That's the thing, it's India is neither one nor the other in a full sense. But in terms of global alliances, because there are some alliances, but it remained a capitalist country on the whole, right? In India, in a limited sort of capitalism. So Soviet influence, or Soviet relations effectively meant that Soviet Union would prop up India in a stagnant kind of in a stagnant economy, protected economy. So Soviet help was required to keep it going like that, basically, right? It's not.
What was the historical relation between Pakistan and the U.S.?
No, Pakistan basically the U.S. Geopolitical interests, basically. They found they came offering money to whoever becomes an ally.
Not there long before, right? They
Who?
were there only in the post-war era.
Yeah. So here is a new country, easy to throw some money at and become, make an ally, right? U.S. is always looking to make allies who will help them to achieve their geopolitical interests, so on. So Pakistan became an ally very quickly. Yeah, in that sense, yeah, it is that aspect. I mean, it is a very interesting historically to look at some of these early days. So, in the early days of India, so both these blocks are sending people to India, cultural emissaries, political, visitors, and so on. And it's interesting, since I as soon as independence, after independence, Pudovkin comes to India. Pudovkin is the Soviet filmmaker, so immediately within the 1 year, America sends Frank, what's his name? This film director, who I'm forgetting. Very at that time the top filmmaker in America. So this is a cultural sort of attempt to say Soviets are sending people to India, we must do something. So they send this man. And so on all fronts, there are these kinds of attempts to obviously curry favor and so on. But finally, Indian. It's hard to say, but India, why it I mean, Pakistan quickly descended into military dictatorships. But India didn't, and this is one of the things that obviously works in favor of India, in terms of historical, that it did not descend into military dictatorships or other kinds of things, but remained in a, by and large, a democratic, procedurally at least it remained a democracy. And I think one of the reasons, has to be this that the Hindu population under British rule developed a much bigger middle class than the Muslims did. because they were the first persons to benefit from the British bureaucratic opportunities, British professional education, bureaucracy, and other things. So it was a substantial class. It was able to sort of produce the kind of expertise and to run the administration in that way. And I think there was substantial, you might say, social sort of parity between the military leadership, military top ranks, and the others. They were of the same social class, so there was no social separation or hostility which might have led to conflict of interests.